All right. We just had Daniel Grothe with us, and this is a great conversation. Daniel and I go way back. Our parents worked together in Tulsa, Oklahoma to establish Victory Christian Center. And man, it was the highlight of our childhood. He's a little younger than I am.
Yeah.
But man, it was good catching up with Daniel.
Yeah, it was fun watching you guys reminisce and some fun stories. And he's a deep well, man. Pastors, what is the church?
New Life Church in Colorado Springs. Ted Haggard's old church.
Yeah.
Now pastored by Brady Boyd. And he talks about the struggles that they went through in that.
Yeah, he tells that story.
Downfall of the pastor, and then shooting at the church that killed two teenage girls, and a suicide by a random shooter. I mean, they've been through the ringer up there, and Daniel's been through it all with them, with the heart of a shepherd and somebody who loves Jesus and represents him really well.
Yeah, and has a heart for the body of Christ, and really has an understanding of generational Christianity, of family being the long game. We kind of dive into that, and that's my way of describing it. But he's written an entire book that dives into the power of place. He is talking about the importance of putting roots down in an actual place, in a location, but it's also about putting roots down in the context of family, in the context of relationship. And talked about his time there at the church through that season and how that introduced him to Eugene Peterson. So we hear that story too, man. This was just a really cool conversation.
Yeah, I think this is the closest to Bono we've ever been. Both Bono and Daniel Grothe have spent significant time with Eugene Peterson, and so that was pretty cool.
That is cool.
You know, he also brings other people into it, like Wendell Berry, and just to talk about a long obedience in the same direction.
Yeah.
Which is a Peterson quote. I think it's actually a book. You know, there's something to be said about stability and longevity and faithfulness, while not betraying the nature and character of Jesus that represents who God really, really is.
Yeah.
I love that he loves the church, but he's definitely wanting the church to look like Jesus.
I appreciated his pastoral heart and diving into what that actually is. One of the things we talked about was that we're all shepherds and we're all sheep. And there's such a humility in that thought, and such a humility in that way of leading. And
yeah. Daniel's a musician as well. He's an amazing drummer.
Yeah.
I think he said he's played on over 50 different, albums, recordings.
Yeah.
He was a part of Michael Gunger's band.
Yeah. Also the Brilliance.
He's got a lot of great stories in that area as well.
It was a good conversation. I really think this is going to encourage folks, and man, this is fun. I'm enjoying this season 3 so far. It's been rich.
Good times. And Jason, you got a little emotional in this interview, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you being raw and emotional, and I think it means a lot to our audience. It certainly means a lot to me that you're real and authentic in the way that you
thanks, man.
You ask questions and you dive deep.
When folks talk about this podcast and they thank me for it, my first response is always, man, this has been enriching for me. I mean, this has been encouraging for me. The conversations we get to have, some of these conversations I've been aching to have for 20 years, and to have them with such amazing people and such humble people, and be able to do it so freely. I feel the same about you, man. The privilege it is and the honor it is to have these conversations with you on a regular basis.
It is.
And then with some amazing people along the way. So yeah, this is a good one. And it touches near to my heart because it's about family, and it's about the church, and it's about where we've gotten it right, where we need to do better, where we've gotten it wrong. And so it touches close to home,
Well, I enjoy rethinking God with you and with Daniel Grothe. It's been good.
That's it. Yeah, guys. Like, share, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. And God bless you. Enjoy this podcast.
96, and then moved out here in 2003.
Man.
So that's the short version.
You missed the best part. And then you met us.
Yes, met the Clarks. Well, we've known the Clarks like almost since we've been out here, and reconnected to do the podcast. And
Yeah, you've been here 18 years, right?
yeah,
19, yeah.
always been kind of like pals and buds, but this podcast has definitely brought us a lot closer. And
Yeah.
I think we're both kind of like we were on journeys that led us to this place of common ground. I think God's good about that.
Yeah. The Irish call it cumbrogi, like a companionship of the heart.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to stay in one place, though, right? Long enough for that to happen.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Way to go, Jason.
Segue.
Way to bring it home, brother.
That's just well, I've been reading into you. I've been learning. Derek's told me. There it is.
Let's just go ahead and get this out there. Daniel, seriously, excellent book, man. Absolutely love it.
Thank you, bro.
Yeah.
I appreciate that so much.
Really, really well done, and excited to talk to you about it today. So Jason, Daniel, and I have fathers who helped found Victory Christian Center.
Yeah.
From its early humble beginnings of Sheridan Assembly.
Yep.
And that's kind of where we grew up. Daniel's quite a bit younger than me, but I think you were probably closer to my little brother Kyle.
Kyle and I won a state championship together at Victory. He's a year older than me. And so we played a bunch of basketball together. And I'd spent the night over at your parents' place with Kyle in high school, probably once a week, and stole all of Kyle's clothes because his closet was much more sophisticated than mine. And so, yeah, great memories.
That was probably from his older brother Scott that used to steal tons of clothes from Dillard's.
That's awesome.
He had like every flavor of polo, button down, and pullover. Yep. Like
Tommy Hilfiger.
Yeah. We'll just leave that in the past.
Yeah, that's right.
So you wrote a book called The Power of Place: Choosing Stability in a Ruthless Age. I'm going to hold it up right here because I love it. I love the cover. Tell me about this cover.
Yeah. So as I was dreaming this up, I sat down and wrote a one-page write-up to my designer who I'd never met. And I said, you know the title, you've got the manuscript, but here's what's in my heart. So I was thinking about lines on a map. I was thinking about roots underneath the soil, the roots of a tree. My wife said it reminds her of veins in the body carrying the blood throughout the body. And right out of the center of the middle of it shoots out from the preposition of, which I have a section in the book where I say the saints are always from somewhere. And if you want to live a meaningful life, you have to submit yourself to the smallest of all prepositions, which is of.
That's awesome.
You have to become a person of a place. And so all the saints, you've got St. Francis of Assisi, you've got St. Hildegard of Bingen, you've got St. Augustine of Hippo, you've got Teresa of Calcutta, and they got that from Jesus of Nazareth.
That's good.
And God doesn't come and sprinkle salvation from the balcony of heaven and stay at a distance. God does not work from the outside. God moves in and comes from the inside. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So when you look at the cover, hopefully some of that will fire in your imagination.
Yeah, 100%. You know, it also reminds me of the, I don't know if you're familiar with the Japanese art of kitsuki.
Yes, exactly.
Where they would, a broken piece of pottery would be repaired with veins of gold.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, for some reason I saw that as well in the cover. So man, you're just hitting all the cylinders here with this book, man. Hitting it all. I love the concept of the power of place and the early church leaders, including their city names. You know, I mean, for us today, this would be Daniel of Colorado Springs and Jason of Cornelius and Derek of Charlotte. And here we are together talking about the power of place. One of the things that I wanted to start with here is just the benefits of being rooted.
Yeah.
One of your chapter headings there, and you kind of give these three principles that when things are working rightly, place provides security, place nourishes identity, and place affords us the opportunity to exercise skilled mastery. Could you
Yeah.
kind of dive into that a little bit? Because I think those three principles are so key to this book.
Yeah, long before Abraham Maslow wrote up his hierarchy of needs in the early 1940s, sociologists, psychologists, philosophers, theologians have been commenting on the importance of place for launching well into life. If kids that start in a rough spot, you have to unlearn that muscle memory. I was just talking yesterday with a friend who was born in South Sudan. His dad was one of the Lost Boys, and his dad watched his entire community get killed, and this little group of boys, 8, 10, 12 years old, run across the border, somehow find themselves into Egypt, and they get over there and are granted asylum. And my friend is telling me he was by himself in Sudan from 4 to 8 years old, and then from 8 to 11 he was in a refugee camp in Egypt.
Wow.
And he said, Daniel, I've spent my whole life working to undo what was done in those early precognitive. I didn't do this to myself, but I've had to work myself out of it. So place at the very elemental level gives us this, wait, the world can be safe. The world can be decent. The mother nursing her child at her breast, and the child, they say that the child can see the distance from the mom's breast up to the mom's eyes. The intimacy of being in place and nurtured and taken care of by your most important people. So I think in the first decade of life, one of the greatest gifts we can give our kids is just the stability of the world is congenial. You don't have to live threatened. There's food in the pantry. And that's why our heart breaks. And that's why we support widows and orphans. And because we've got to help rally for the people who don't have the gift of place. So when place is working rightly, the first thing it provides is security. When place is working rightly, it provides us an identity. I grew up, Derek, at Victory with your parents, with my parents, with the Dartys, with, I could go down the list, the Newmans, the Taylors, so many different people who marked my life, and they named me.
Yeah.
Your parents. In my first book, Derek, I wrote toward the end, Developing a Theology of the Laying On of Hands. And I said, Mark and Linda Turner laid hands on me, and they did my whole life. They spoke life into me. They told me what they saw. When I was wandering, they would jerk the slack out and they would go, man of God, rise up. You're better than that. I know who you are. I know where you come from. And they gave me an identity with the people of God. And identity doesn't come to us in abstraction. It comes to us in our particular locations. And so Tulsa helped me think about and care about and learn about things that I would not have cared about had I grown up in Boston. So no one place can be everything for you, but your particular place will mark you and call things out of you and get you ready for the world in a really specific way. The third thing, place provides the chance to practice skilled mastery. Ellen Davis, the great Old Testament theologian who lives in North Carolina, she's been at Duke, 75 years old, brilliant, and I've interviewed her several times. And she translates the first chapter of Genesis 1:26, 1:27, take dominion. She translates it, exercise skilled mastery. Dominion has this, in our world of domination, it has that connotation of, oh, the earth is, we do whatever we want. This is our place and everyone else is paying rent and we beat the thing up. No, she says, no, to be God's image bearers means you find yourself in the garden that you're in and you study it and you pay attention and you discern what it needs from you. And then you begin to exercise skilled mastery within it. So I pastor in a way in Colorado Springs in a way that I wouldn't have pastored in Tulsa. And in a way that if I moved from here to Chicagoland, I would have to become a different kind of pastor for a different kind of context. So where you are will demand a certain kind of response from you.
Man, that's so good. You're bringing back all kinds of memories. I mean, your mom and dad had huge influence on my life as well. Your mom was basically the principal of our our school when I was there. So I'm sure there's many
Yep.
times she wanted to lay hands on me as well, maybe in a different way. And then, look, I got to tell you this one little story. I mean, your dad, I think it was my freshman year in college, and I was at Oral Roberts University, and my parents were out of town, and I hosted a party at my house. This is before my parents moved away from Tulsa and left me alone in Tulsa to fend for myself. And I had this rager party, and your dad, I don't know, for some reason decided to show up at the house and just busted all of us.
Oh.
Um, and it was like I couldn't get away with anything. The village was keeping an eye on me at all times,
Yes.
and it's probably best. I think it's because my mom was a praying mom,
Yes.
but I loved your mom and dad so much. Your dad was the worship pastor. Your mom has such a kindness about her, and those are indelible imprints that have been etched into my childhood and my memory,
Mm-hmm.
and my identity.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
so I love how you bring that out in the book. That place provides
Yep.
that identity and that skilled mastery and that safety. I think it's beautiful.
When life hits the fan, you know what I do? I get on a plane and I go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I drive over to Bartlesville and I find your dad. I find your mom. I find Tom and Susan Newman. There's Jim and Pam King. They're different people when I need to remember who I am. I just flew to Nashville 2 months ago to go spend the day with Tom Newman. He was out there working and he wanted to interview me about the book. And we spent 24 hours together, and it was the best 24 hours of my quarter last year, my fourth quarter, because it reminded me, he told me stories of my childhood. He told me stories of our parents and him and Susan and your parents praying as Victory was launching. And Lord, we see this dream. Would you give that to us? And so one of the concepts that I develop in the book, and Jason, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this, but this concept of social capital. So we live in a world that is just so enamored of financial capital. And what are the markets doing today? And stocks are up 8%. And what's Elon saying we should do? And Bezos is saying this, and Buffett. Fine, we got to all find a way to pay our bills. Money matters. I'm not at all diminishing the role of money, but what most people don't think about is the thick layering of social capital. So to be able to get on a plane and go see Mark and Linda Turner and have them remind me who I am makes me one of the richest people on the planet. To be able to have people who have watched my parents for 45 years be married and prayed us through. And one time in high school, my parents were on the brink. Life just sneaks up on all of us. And it was a particularly difficult 6 months. And one day, Tom Newman just showed up at our house and knocked on the door. And we go, "Hey, Tom, what are you doing?" He said, "I was in prayer this morning, and I don't know why, but I just knew the Holy Spirit told me to give you this." And he hands us an envelope, and there's a check for 6 months of my parents' mortgage. And dude, people who don't have social capital, people who's going to bury you? Who's going to show up at the hospital on your worst day? Who's your 2 a.m. phone call?
Yeah.
Who's going to carry your kids forward when you're no longer there and remind them who they are? Who's going to carry your story over the decades? If we have deep pockets, but we don't have social capital, we are poor. And this is why I love going to the third world. This is why I love paying attention to developing the global South. These folks have zero resources, and they have deep joy, and they care for one another, and the village comes together. So I think in America, in our moment, we need to recover the gift of place and the social capital that is available to all of us if we would just tap into it.
We have a saying in my house. A lot of what you're describing fits in this saying. We have a saying that family is the long game. It's the idea that there's this generational way in which you think, but you only have access to that to the extent that you've actually experienced some of the things you've experienced, and certainly some of the things I've experienced. you can look back to the generations past, and I can look back quite a ways. So much was going off in me while you were talking. My childhood was one in which we got involved in an incredible community that eventually got sideways because of poor leadership, some horrible doctrines, and became cultish. But the things we experienced in that community were the things that my mom and dad then spent the next 20 years in search of, because they were so beautiful. I went to as many schools as there are grades. I met a girl and married the girl that was born and raised in the same home, and everybody in town knew her. I loved that. We've been here 18 years now. I love that. But I had to learn how to get a hold of what you're talking about in the context of the nucleus that was my family. And I had that. It was powerful. I could say that place for me wasn't about a location, because I lived in a whole lot of them. I totally understand. My dad taught me this: wherever you go, act as though that's the place you'll be buried. And that was what he was giving me. He was giving me place in the middle of a move. He was giving me, hey, this is where you put your roots in. Act like this is the place that you're going to raise your grandkids in. That way you'll engage fully in that place. But then 2 years later, we'd pack up. So I had to learn place, what you're talking about, outside of the context of actual physical place. And so there's a few questions I have for you in that context. What do you say to the folks that, because we live in a world right now, especially in America, everybody's moving somewhere. This is the problem. There's so much disconnection, and there's so much, it's such a fast-paced thing. And I think a whole lot of what we're looking at right now, and Derek and I talk about this thing called deconstruction that's happening right now. And I think a whole lot of some of what's happening there is connected very much to this thing you're talking about right now. So I would love two things: to know what motivated you to write this. What was the thing that said, I see, I'm a writer as well. And when I'm writing, it's a lot. People ask me, they say, man, what do you love about writing? I'm like, I love when it's over. I love when it's done, because it's so much work. But when you do it, you have to be passionate about what you're writing about, because you're going to give a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of your life to it, because you have to see that you're addressing something that you think is worth your time to invest into. So what drew you to write this book? And then for those of us that are living in a world where we didn't necessarily, I did have family giving me that sense of place, but a whole lot of people don't even have that. And I'm curious how that's connected to what's happening in deconstruction, and see how that's connected to some of the things you're writing about.
Absolutely. So first, I'll say two things that stand out about where this came from. None of us write in a vacuum. We're made. We're marked in the way that we're marked, and we care about the things that we care about based on, for me, family of origin and my family stories. So my dad lived in Tulsa for 52 years. He couldn't go anywhere where he wasn't walking into a grocery store and someone saying, hey, you officiated my kid's wedding and you buried my grandparents, So just watching the power of place. But my mom's parents lived on this farm right up here on the wall in northwestern Idaho, 700 acres. On my grandpa's side, Grandpa Dan, who I'm named after, and then Grandma Weezy, who turned 90 yesterday. Her and her twin Lois, Louise and Lois, both turned 90 yesterday. Amazing. They showed up at the same restaurant wearing the exact same thing, the same sweater, not even the same colors, the same exact sweater. And they had no communication about it. Nature, nurture, wow. So Grandma Weezy's dad was Hieronymus Athanasius Assimacopoulos, and he was from Monostraki, Greece. He was the youngest of 10 kids, and when he was 10 years old, his dad died. And his mom took him down right on the water there, the Aegean. She took him down, or the Mediterranean portion there. She took him down and put him on a boat. And she said, baby, you'll have a better life in America. I love you.
Wow.
The other 9 stayed back to run the family business. The youngest, she saw a future for him, and she kissed him and she never saw him again. And he got on the boat at 12 years old, and they stopped along the way, different islands, and he landed at Ellis Island. He had just turned 13, and he got off the boat and he walks up to the immigration counter, and they said, what's your name? And he writes it out because he'd never spoken a word of English. Hieronymus Athanasius Asmacopoulos. And essentially the story is they say that's not going to work here. And so they hand him a phone book. This is what they used to do. They would slide a phone book across the table, and he flipped to where the most common last name was. And that day he went from Hieronymus Asmacopoulos to Harry Smith. And he got on the railroads, 13 years old. He was there. Someone gave him a Bible at the port. 1907, he gets on the railroads, starts learning the language, goes through West Virginia, meets a girl, Margaret Turley. They fall in love, 18 years old, get married. Keep working west, land train tracks across the United States. And they get off, he saved all his money. They get off the train in Idaho, right there, Lapway, Idaho, the Nez Perce Indian tribe, where the Snake River meets the Clearwater River. And he said, we stop here. So Hieronymus goes to the Indians, the Nez Perce Indians, and says, I want to buy 2,000 acres. And they said, well, by federal law, we would love to sell you 2,000, but by federal law, we can only sell you 160. And he said, well, you're going to sell me 2,000 acres. So he writes Washington, D.C. And my grandma Wheezy, 90, still has the document signed by Vice President Grover Cleveland saying the Nez Perce tribe can sell 2,000 acres to Hieronymus Asmacopoulos, a.k.a. Cool. Harry Smith.
Yeah.
So she lives on that land today. And I would still go out every summer, leave Tulsa, go spend 2 months out there working the land, cutting sod. So land and place got in my soul and in my psyche.
Yeah, it did.
And then I watched my dad and mom live faithfully in Tulsa. So there's the family of origin side. I've seen place be powerful, and there's not anywhere Wheezy can go without someone saying, Louise Wilson, you and Dan changed my life, and you blessed my grandkids, and you've been the faithful pillars in this community. So family of origin. But the other thing is, being a pastor, I am watching just what you said. People don't know who they are, and they don't know where they are. And we are the loneliest generation. I just can't imagine another society being any lonelier. And I think you see it in our finances. We have more money than any society in history, and we are medicating ourselves to death with recreational drugs, with alcohol. We're anxious as they come. So we have to step back and interrogate our moment and say, how's it working out for us? We are living a human experiment. This is the first time in world history that we have the option to do what we are doing. And we've got wanderlust. People think the grass is greener. I'm going to run down to Austin. I'm going to run out to LA. I'm going to make meaning in New York. And after 10 years, they paid their bills, but they're broke.
Right.
And then there's this economic migration. Like we make people move. We make people, the markets get unsettled. So the family of origin, and then the pastoral front row seat to what our rootlessness is doing to the human condition.
Yeah.
It just makes me think we've got to recover this vow of stability.
And your love is revival. You're shaking the ground.
Hey guys, I'm interrupting this podcast for just a minute so I can invite you to partner with us by giving to A Family Story. A Family Story is a 501, a nonprofit, and it's our ministry. And it's what allows for me to produce this podcast and other regular content. We've been living this faith journey for a long time, but 2014 was when we officially stepped away from the traditional pastoring approach to full-time ministry. It's been fun. This journey's been wild. And this last year was no less faith-inducing, with COVID affecting travel and speaking. And it's been good, because hey, we started a podcast. Our passion is to create content catalytic for an encounter with the always good, transforming, reconciling love of our Heavenly Father. And so our heart through this ministry has always been that through speaking, writing, film, and music, we're relentlessly sharing the goodness of our Father, the good news. Your giving goes directly to support this podcast, as well as written content, discipleship content, teaching small group messages, articles that we release weekly, and also the book I'm writing. I'm excited about what I'm chasing down right now. We appreciate all the support, whether it's sharing, writing a review, following us, signing up for our email list, or financially. We just love being on the journey with you. If you want to give to A Family Story, you can go to afamilystory.org, afamilystory.org, and click on the Give button. All right, thanks, guys. Let's get back to the podcast.
Well, I was agreeing, and I mean, thinking about this in chapter 4, you talk about honoring your location, the membership benefits of place. And I love the Wendell Berry quote. I'm a Wendell Berry fan myself, but he said here, I take literally the statement in the Gospel of John that God loves the world.
Mm-hmm.
And just hearing some of the things you're saying, it's reminding me of how important it is to just stay planted.
Yes.
To have that stability. The scripture in Jeremiah, that if you'll seek the peace and prosperity of the city that you're in, that it will determine your peace and prosperity.
Yeah.
Such an important concept
and
to think about. I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and what most, you guys will know this because you've spent your life studying the scriptures, but what most people don't realize is the context of that passage is, oh, by the way, you're going to spend 70 years in Babylon. Like, exile. You're not going to be home. And what do you do in exile? He says, plant gardens, marry your kids, start businesses, go for it, seek the peace and the prosperity, for if it flourishes, you too will flourish. And so people idealize place and think, I've got to find the place that just is my vibe, and it just, I can live my own story here. And these people were told to live the vow of stability in the last place on the planet they wanted to be. And very often we do find ourselves living in exile. We do find ourselves on the move. We aren't where we thought we would be. We're not in Kansas anymore. And still we have been called to seek the peace and the prosperity of the place we find ourselves in. So I just watch people, to me, very often it feels like a self-inflicted wound.
Right.
Like, we don't have to bounce like this. Some people do. And for those who do, grace, grace, grace. This is not a book romanticizing place. If you're a military family and every 3 years you got to do it, I understand. God bless you. And there's a way, as you said, Jason, there's a way to live faithfully where you are for the time that you're there. But very often this is a self-inflicted wound, and people don't know who they are anymore because they've lost connection to the community and the larger story that they used to inhabit in their old place. Well,
and Daniel, isn't it true though that we truly kind of almost are in exile in a way as citizens of the kingdom? We are foreigners and sojourners here in this earth, and we're planted in these different places to plant the seeds of the kingdom, the seeds of love and joy and peace and kindness. I mean, I'm just thinking about my own almost 19 years in the exact same neighborhood. And, to be greeted in the cul-de-sac by a kid that I watched grow up from a neighbor, husband and wife, family that we're good friends with, watched both their sons grow up. And one day, one of their sons, now he's 24. And he meets me in the cul-de-sac and he says, "Hey, I can't think of anyone else I would rather have do my wedding ceremony. Would you marry me? We're getting married on the Appalachian Trail in this time." And I'm like, I almost started weeping. I'm like, this person does not come to church. They're not a member of our church. They're just my neighbor. This to me is what you're talking about, in long obedience in the same direction, which I want you to dive into that a little bit, because you're one of the few people I know that have had a similar experience as Bono, with the privilege of meeting Eugene Peterson and spending time with Eugene Peterson. Tell us a little bit about that, but that statement that he makes, long obedience in the same direction, it just resonates so powerfully.
It does. And to your point, I'll just launch from your story. You want to see the kingdom of God come on the earth as it is in heaven. And you want to see evangelism that is actually relational and beautiful and natural. Be a great neighbor. Just Be the dad who's got popsicles in his freezer in the summer, so that the 5-year-old, when you moved there, that kid was 5. And he was coming over hot and sweaty in the summer, running through your lawn, and you didn't scream at him. You go, "Hey, bro, you took care of him." And those seeds that you planted for so many years are coming up in a harvest and will come up in a harvest. So the power of place also has implications for evangelism and expansion of the kingdom of God. But Eugene Peterson, when I found him, 16 years ago, the bottom had fallen out here at our church. And if you have time for me to just share a brief snippet.
Yeah, please do. We want you to share that story.
So I came here 17 years ago from Tulsa, and our church was just kicking butt and taking names. We were riding high, and our pastor was the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, 30 million member group. George W. Bush, in his presidency, Skyped into our pastors' conference, and Mel Gibson flew out here on a private jet to release the Passion of the Christ to 3,000 pastors. Guys, the room was intoxicated. I'm saying all this kind of tongue in cheek, but when you're living in the moment, it was, look what we are.
Mm-hmm.
And our senior pastor caught in a salacious scandal that, I mean, it basically wrote itself on the front page of every international news media outlet, because it was that, woo. And so we lose our senior pastor. We discover we're $26.5 million in debt overnight. Meanwhile, a global economic recession is happening in 2007. We had to fire 44 people overnight. So lose our senior pastor, fire 44 friends. We're heartbroken, walking through the valley of the shadow of death. We get a new senior pastor from Dallas, Fort Worth, Brady Boyd, Gateway Church, man of God. And he's 100 days into the new job, and we're starting to really think maybe we could climb out of this. Maybe the wind of the Spirit is shifting to our back. Maybe there's a future. Dr. Jack Hayford's here preaching that morning. It was majesty, worship his majesty. It was amazing, just glorious day. And 1:00, I'm standing down at the end of our children's hallway. People, parents are getting their kids. Everyone's ready for lunch. Go turn on football. And out of nowhere, you hear the worst sound you could ever imagine, which is bop, 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 bop. A guy comes on our campus with an assault rifle, AR-15, and 1,000 rounds of ammunition, a couple handguns strapped to his chest, and he's just spraying bullets everywhere. I run into our pastor's office. There's a shooter on campus, and Jack Hayford's there, and I dive under the desk, and parents are locking themselves in bathrooms, and the shooter killed 2 teenage girls, 16 and 18, in our parking lot, and then ran in, and he's just spraying. And a 5'3" lady security guard runs toward him, ducks in behind a door, and steps out with a handgun, shoots him in the leg, and he falls down. And then he blows his brains out in our children's hallway at the check-in counter.
Oh my goodness.
And so within a year, we lose our senior pastor, discover we're $26.5 million in debt, fire 44 friends, get a new pastor, double murder, suicide. And we were stunned. And speaking of the power of place, there weren't a lot of people wanting to stay around after that. And you can't blame them. I was scared to bring my little 6-month-old, my first baby, to church the next Sunday. I was scared out of my freaking mind. But somehow, some way, a group of us just kept going. And I go to a Goodwill on Monday morning. I've got the book here. And I see this book up on the shelf. And I think, man, contemplative pastor, that's interesting. Eugene H. Peterson. Okay, I think he translated the Message Bible. So I see that there's a 99-cent stamp in it, and I buy it, take it home that day, Monday, day off. And I read all 171 pages. I mean, it was like out-of-body experience. We all have like 5 or 10 of these moments in our lives where it's a line of demarcation that you never recover from.
Mm-hmm.
And this book was that for me. So I thought, I got to write this guy and just, 1, at least tell him thank you.
Yeah.
But 2, I'm in unthinkable heaviness here and confusion. I'm 24 years old. I don't know what to do. So I write in this letter, Eugene, Daniel, pastor's kid, Tulsa, Colorado Springs, Ted Haggard, double murder suicide. Can you help? And I send it to his publisher because I don't know who he is, how old he is, where he lives. And I'm sure the publisher won't get it to him. But I said, "Dear Nav Press, if you could please send this to Mr. Peterson, I'd be grateful." Well, 3 weeks later, I go to the mailbox and I pick this up and, Eugene Peterson, Lakeside, Montana, 59922. And I was like, what? Like your grandparents' chicken scratch cursive. And he says, "Dear Daniel, yes, I'd be willing to spend a day with you here in Montana, period, but not so fast." Here's the original letter. And he goes on to say, I want you to write me a 3-page paper on what is church and a 3-page paper on what is pastor to see if we even have enough common ground to begin a conversation. And then he says, "You are a practicing part of the Americanization of the church that is degrading, if not outright destroying the life of the pastor.
Wow.
Do you think we even have enough common ground?"
I love that Eugene Patterson gave you homework before you could visit him.
Yeah. And one of the things that I learned from that is anything that's worth it is worth working for. And Eugene knew that if he gave me a cheap yes, it would have crippled my growth. It would have stunted me.
Wow.
He wanted to make me work. He wanted to see if I was worth my salt. And, Jesus all along the way is going, "No, why don't you stay over there? No, why don't you do, no, go ahead, go back home." And people press in or they quit. And I think
Right.
Eugene was trying to sift me. But if I would fight through, then maybe I'd be worth the conversation. So that began a 10-year back and forth of making 10 trips out to Eugene's house, staying with him and Jan, writing letters, phone calls. So Derek, you asked what, some of the things that I learned about stability through that engagement. I called him on his 82nd birthday. He's almost exactly 50 years older than me. So I said, "Eugene, you're 82. How do you feel?" And he said, "I feel 82. And I said, "I'm 32. Do you remember 32? And right away, he goes, "Absolutely. I remember 32. And I said, "I have 3 little kids." And he said, "I had 3 little kids." I said, "What do you remember about 32? He said 2 things. First thing I learned at 32 was I'm not a professor, I'm a pastor. Before that, he was translating Greek and Hebrew. He was in the seminaries doing really good work. But he said at 32, I owned in my soul, I was made for the church. I was made to shepherd people for the long haul." That's the first thing he remembered. The second thing about 32 was he said, I then made a commitment to essentially try to die where I was, to not work the system, to not give in to religious careerism, to not live on the circuit, to not apply for larger platforms and more money and work it. I determined at 32 years old that I was going to try to serve this one congregation for my entire ministry career. And so as a 32-year-old, that helped reinforce in me that my instincts weren't wrong. I had 10 years in me at New Life at that point, and now I've got another 7. And unless the Lord interrupts me, I've told the Lord many times, "God, you know how to get me, and I know how to hear you, and I know how to obey, but I'm not going to live as if my life is going to be unsettled 2 or 3 more times. So if you want me to move, you tell me and I'll do it. But I'm going to try to die here unless you interrupt me." So I think Eugene helped me get that sense of a vow of stability in me.
I read an article that you wrote after his passing, where I quote you, you said it took him only 65 years to become an overnight success. And you were addressing the long game again.
Yeah.
I appreciate that he knew to have you steward
Yeah.
a relationship with him that had longevity at its roots, at its core, if you will, to have you write a letter.
Yeah.
And that homework, Bill, was followed up with, like you said, a relationship. He was a pastor.
Yeah.
He actually pastored you.
Yeah.
Which wasn't about a pulpit.
Yeah.
It wasn't about a message. It wasn't about getting you to learn something. It wasn't about information. It was actually doing the thing called relationship, which is I'll lay my life down for you.
Yes.
And I'm looking for that from you as well.
Yes, he did.
I grew up in the church. I'm currently right now, I'm not connected to the Sunday day in, day out.
Yes.
I'm still very much a part of the church deep and wide, but it doesn't look very much like what I grew up with. And a lot of the folks listening are on that journey where they're like, man, I can't make it work here. I haven't been able to connect there. And a lot of the reason, and that I think is part of the reason, is that we've had this fast food institutional model of what church looks like, and we've called it family.
Yep.
We've put all the right words and language around it to give you all the sense that it's a family, that it is a long game, but there's nothing long game about it. And the problem starts first and foremost with those who are leading it, and they're not leading it in a generational way. They're not leading it laying their lives down. Leadership to them is literally, I say it this way: all of us are shepherds, or all of us are sheep. If we can't all be shepherds and all be sheep, I don't want to hear the analogy, and I certainly don't want to hear it from a pulpit.
Yeah.
And I'd love for you to speak to that, because specifically to the audience that's listening to us, we're looking, the world is hungry for this thing you're talking about, which is this generational deep. It's about place, but it's about trust, because what you're really describing is trust, and trust takes time.
Yes.
It is earned over time and faithfulness. And man, we could use some older generations and some younger generations that understood that and were willing to do the hard work, so that 65 years later they could call themselves an overnight success. I'd love for you to just maybe share some of that.
Man, that beautiful. Jason, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. The first book I wrote was called Chasing Wisdom, and it's about recovering the concept of the sages. That in every ancient Near Eastern society, you had the elders at the city gates who had lived long obediences, who had worked, they had learned, I say they're skilled in the discipline, the spiritual discipline of trial and error. There's just certain things that you have to learn over time. And so if you had a dispute that you need adjudicated, if your neighbor moved the ancient boundary stone and was encroaching on the fields that your great grandparents worked for, what did you do? The two of you went to the town square and you submitted yourselves to the sages, the elders at the city gates, and you heard their counsel and you listened to their ruling, and the society submitted to their collective wisdom. And because of that, you were able to hug it out.
Wow.
You were able to put the boundary stone where it belongs, because we got everyone's mind on it. We got the wisdom of the crowd, the wise crowd. And we live in a society that glorifies celebrity and youth and beauty and skinny bodies and tight skin and we have all the wrong heroes. That's basically what book number 1 is about.
Gotcha.
And helping people reclaim an imagination and a vision for the sages and the saints who have walked miles with God and who have lived those faithful lives.
That's beautiful.
So I think every young person deeply desires that. I think every old person desires to live in that kind of an engagement. But right now we find ourselves separated generationally.
Wow.
And I think actually the local church can be the place where the young submit to the old and honor thy father and mother, that it may go well with you and you live a long life on the earth. And the old don't die alone, and they don't die in seclusion, and they don't die wishing they'd spent their last 20 years differently. Like, how much do you want to golf? Like, really? How many cruises can you take? Like, the elderly need to give the wisdom that they fought to earn for decades. They need to give it away to the young. And the young, I would say, have the duty to go and to approach and to submit and say, hey, I see something in you that I need. And so if you're listening and you find yourself either an older person going, what does 65 to 85 need to look like? I'll tell you, we desperately need you now more than ever. Yeah. Your greatest years of influence are ahead of you. The American dream tells you you've done your work and now just enjoy. And I'm here to say the kingdom of God says you are coming into your greatest years of influence and strength and wisdom. You have more time than you've ever had. You likely have some money available, and you've got a home that you can bring people into. Live your life giving it away.
That's beautiful.
And young ones, tell them you need them. So there is that thing. That's me spitballing on something I heard you bring up.
I love that you're writing these books, and I love that you're a pastor writing these books, because I think there's such a desire for what you're talking about. You're talking about a family,
yes,
which is what Jesus walked the planet to reveal God as, the father of a family. He came to reveal what it looks like to be a child in the family, and said, this is what the kingdom is. But so many folks that are probably listening right now didn't find it in the institutional model. But
Yeah.
we're all looking for that.
And Daniel, just to maybe put it into a little bit of a context with Jason, one of the comments I get from a lot of people who listen to this podcast is, does your church, like, does your congregation know that you do this podcast and that you're engaging with some of these very difficult questions, and I'm like, well, yeah, and so that's kind of a surprise. And the reason it's a surprise is because there is a group of individuals out there that have been into the institutional church. They've had serious questions and they're looking for answers, but their questions are shunned away. They're not accepted in their current status of life where they are. And there's a sense of saying, hey, everybody belongs, everybody's welcome and whatnot. But in reality, there's a sin of certainty in the institutional church that says, we have all the answers, and you either conform to these answers that we have, or you're just gonna have to go somewhere else. And I think that's kind of what Jason's getting at is, how do we?
Yes.
I actually take it a step further. I would actually say that those who practice such things are engaged in an anti-Christ spirit. They are engaged in something that's anti-Christ.
Absolutely.
And so I feel like deconstruction in a lot of people, why I look at it as, and I've kind of been through my own deconstruction as well. I think you and I both have similar upbringings and a very strong word of faith background. And maybe there's some good things, but there's also some stuff we had to unlearn. I just say it's okay to ask the questions and let it all burn down as long as you reveal the cornerstone.
Yeah.
The building can totally burn down as long as we reveal the cornerstone, whose name is Jesus, and then we can rebuild from there and we're rebuilding on the right thing, on Jesus as God in the flesh.
I think all three of us grew up probably hearing the judgment begins in the house of God thing.
Sure.
And I think that's just right. I think that's just right. Jesus is really concerned, he's not primarily concerned about the adulterous woman out in the streets and how she's just making Israel go to hell in a handbasket. Jesus is walking into the house of God it was supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, and it's become a den of robbers. And he goes, I'm going to look this thing in the eye. I am going to look this thing in the eye. So I think we're living in a moment of reckoning. I think there is a moment of judgment that I think we ought to see as God's mercy. It is just so merciful of him.
Yep.
It is so merciful of him to go, look, there are people out there in the streets. The lonely need to be set into families. And I said in Psalm 68, this is who I was. God in his holy dwelling is the defender of orphans and widows, and he sets the lonely into families. I have always been about this work. And as long as you're protecting the machine, you are missing the lonely that are out there. Look, someone feed me a meal, someone rename me, because I had biological parents who beat the hell out of me. Would you please rename me? Would you please put your hands on me and show me actually that developing a theology of the laying on of hands, the very worst wounds that happen to us are with the perverse laying on of hands. And the church gets to be the place where we crack open the horn of oil and we go, look, I know you've been wounded by this, and I'll go slow enough to earn your trust. And if it takes 10 years for you to trust me to lay hands on you, I've got all the time in the world.
Oh, man.
I will not, I'm here, baby. And so 10 years later, they go, would you please lay hands on me and speak life over me? And the very thing that wounded them is the very way that God will heal them. And questions, like we need certain things to be torn down and deconstructed and removed from our souls. I remember N.T. Wright saying one time to someone asking him questions, he goes, "Hey, tell me the God you don't believe in." And they started talking about it. He goes, "Yeah, I don't believe in him either."
Right.
It's okay. Can we make it a conversational space?
Yeah.
Can we make the Church of Jesus not a platform to spout our certainties and toe the party line with our little tight theologies, and recover the Psalms of Lament? This last Sunday, I stood up in church in real time, the 11 o'clock service. I heard at 10:30 that one of our 88-year-old saints who's there every week, Miss Joanne, she wasn't there at 7:30 in the morning where she normally is. And my mom and two other ladies go, "Have you talked to Joanne today? Is she here?" "No, she's not here." Well, they started calling her home 7:30. She didn't pick up. And my mom sent Linda, one of the ladies, drive to Joanne's townhome. Gets to the townhome, Joanne's in there yelling. She had fallen and broken her hip.
Wow.
And no one knew where she was until the church said, "Where's Joanne?"
Right.
And I stood up in the 11 o'clock service and I said, "We got a couple thousand people in this room, and some of you would be tempted to go, 'This is great, awesome, fantastic.' No, where's Joanne?"
Right.
Beautiful.
Because Joanne's not here, and we need to find Joanne. And we saved her life that day because the church wasn't functioning as a machine; it was functioning as the family of God.
Beautiful.
So, can we recover the Psalms of Lament?
Yeah.
Can we make it a conversational space?
Yeah.
Can we not be so politically partisan that we drive away half of the people who are aching to find the Father,
Yeah.
but they can't get past our politics? And can we sign up for the long game?
Yes. Yeah.
So I love watching people now. As a 17-year pastor at New Life, I have officiated marriages and then dedicated their babies and then baptized their children. And then they call me and say, "Hey, my great grandma died. Can you bury her?" So I bury great grandma. And then it's their parents' 50th anniversary. And then this couple's at 25 years. So
That's beautiful.
I don't want anything to do with a church that doesn't want to live the lifespans with people over the long decades and carry each other across the finish line into our rest. No,
Yeah.
thank you. I think if people knew that the church could be that, and it is happening, it's happening. People who are wrestling like you guys, asking questions. We see the big ticket items, and I used to be a part of a church that was a part of the big ticket items. So I'm not throwing the first stone here, but as we kind of move past the talking points and the news cycle, and we go, wait, there are lots of people asking really good questions who are recovering these ancient practices, who are becoming the family of God, that the lost can be set into that family. Like, if people knew that that was possible, I think more and more people would be showing up at our churches.
I mean, that's the revival that we're all hungry for. I want to say two things to what you said, and I know we don't have you for much longer. First, it is happening, man. It is happening.
It is.
It's happening with Derek, and it's happening. I want to shout out to some friends up in Western New York. I have a pastor friend up there, Sean Harnish, who's been in a community for so long, and I talked to him a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they are in the community, man, like doing it the long game, and it's not sexy,
Yeah.
but it's freaking beautiful.
Yeah.
It's what we're hungry for. It's transformational. What you said, the thing that you said that most impacted me, and this is the thing that I just thank you for from the bottom of my heart, because you're a pastor. The wound that is inflicted by a pastor is the most damaging wound.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the birthplaces of this thing called deconstruction, some of this reactionary thing that's taking place.
Absolutely.
And I keep looking for the pastors who will say, listen, just by the fact that I carried the title, and I've carried the title at times in my life, and in those times when someone shared with me the brokenness that's been done to them by those authoritarian approaches to God, and then through them to the people, I have stood in their place and apologized and wept and said, that is not a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could get pastors who would step into that place and say, listen, that trauma is not right.
Yeah.
And this is who Jesus is. And love is the long game. Family is the long. I'm so grateful for you to do that and to speak to that as a pastor, and that you're writing and chasing that down. I'm thankful to you for that.
Jason, I feel your emotion, and it's the pathos of God. You're the energy that you're carrying right now is the heart of the Father who aches for every lowercase f father who has tarnished the capital F Father
Yeah. Yep.
in other people's minds. And we cannot, pastors, if you're listening, we cannot apologize too much.
Yeah.
We cannot tenderize our hearts too much. We cannot get on our knees and wash the feet of the world too much. We have so many wounded people out there that are not rebellious and trying to burn the thing down. They're just children that have been hurt.
That's it.
And we've got to just say, I'm sorry, please forgive. I wasn't there 20 years ago. Please forgive me.
Yeah.
I'm going to stand in that place and I'm going to own that position, that title. And I repent to you on behalf of the Father who would never have you think that way about
That's
him.
good.
So if we could do that, man, like that is the magic. That is holy ground. And
Yeah.
I don't want anything to do with a church that doesn't know how to repent and that doesn't know how to say, have mercy on me, oh God. I have sinned. I've done what's evil in your sight. And Moses gets kept out of the promised land because he strikes what he should have spoken to. When we get all angsty and mad and we start hitting things that God told us to talk to, you lose the promised land over crap like that. And so, like, channel your, be quiet, slow down, get your heart right.
Yeah.
You are not God. I'm talking to myself. Like, anyway, forgive me, but I could just go all day, and I appreciate you showing that you could too.
I could. I know that you've got something coming up, but I'm a singer-songwriter. That's my background for 15 years. And then, I moved into writing full time. So I can't let you go because I love the brilliance. I love some of the stuff that you've been connected to. We've talked a little tacos. I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about some of the musical stuff you've been part of.
Yeah, well, my dad was a worship leader at our church growing up, and so I was in the band pit every service. And he had some of the great musicians of a generation there. Reba McEntire's drummer for 20 years. Tommy Harden was his drummer. Oral Roberts' kid that was in the Maybe Center so I was sitting up on Tommy's lap watching him, and then he'd have me come up and play the altar call at the end of the service. So I was just in all the services, always playing. And then Michael Gungor and I went to high school together at Victory in Tulsa and wrote songs and led worship at Victory Christian School and did all this stuff together, and then started touring and recording. And so I've played on about 50 albums and written some songs that have been recorded and sung around the world and in church. But music, man, I think one of the great gifts is when a musician becomes a preacher or a musician becomes a writer for the larger body. Because, like, as a drummer, I walk into a room and a drummer is always thinking, what is the color? What is the tempo? What is the feel? Yep. What is the emotion of this? Is it loud? Is it energetic? Is it soft? Is it quiet? Does it need to totally stop? So a drummer's always reading a room, and I preach musically. Like when I'm thinking through a text, you put John 4 in front of me, and I'm going, how many beats per minute is this? Is Jesus at 135, or is this a 72 ballad? Is this
That's awesome.
It helps you kind of get into the feel of the text. And so music is in me, and I'm always thinking and writing musically, lyrically. There's a certain cadence that you want to find. And so thank you for even asking me that question, because there are very few people who will ask me that question. But music matters.
And of course it matters, especially when you're younger. I mean, it matters to me, but I got my kids are now studios in the homes, and
bro.
And but talk for hours on that. It's the same, as a communicator, I learned to write first in song lyrics, so you learn you have to say a lot with a little. Mm-hmm. That's certainly has played a huge role in what I do now. But
one of the things about this, I called Michael Gungor when I was early 20s, 25 probably. And we just had Lillian. And I said, Michael, I was out every weekend. And I said, you need to call someone who wants to be in 15 passenger vans and sleep in hotels and live in green rooms. And it really actually, it confirmed for me, because I walked into all these green rooms and what I realized is I'm getting everyone's 100% every time.
Right.
And this is an illusion. This is not reality. This is an illusion. And by the way, it means that we can't have intimacy and closeness because it's built on a false interaction.
Yeah.
Basically what I learned in that moment is I want to be at home.
That's good.
I want to be with my congregation. I want to be with my family.
How old were you?
I was 25.
Wow. You learned it young. That's beautiful.
I didn't want to live on the road. I wanted to build something with the same people in the same place that could actually accrue and have this compounding interest of meaning.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So, hey, man, Eric, I'll let you close us out, man, with a few questions. And man, it's been an honor and a privilege to connect with you. It really has been.
Treat, Jason.
Yeah, Daniel, absolutely. Want to encourage everybody that's listening to go buy your book. Once again, it's The Power of Place, Choosing Stability in a Ruthless Age. I think it will, I think this book is going to be a marker for the things that we're longing for in our heart, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a similar experience, no musical background, but 7 years of being on the road, international travel in the name of ministry, and basically leaving my wife and daughter at home, to be a single mom raising her daughter while I'm, 1.8 million miles on American Airlines. In a 7-year time span. And, I remember I had that encounter of somebody pointing their finger in my face and saying, Derek, you're a pastor. This isn't who you are.
That's good, bro.
And man, it just hit me like a lightning bolt. And I would agree 100%. We're all sheep and we're all shepherds, because if what you're doing isn't being done with the heart of the good shepherd, we get this kind of weird dualism, the fivefold ministry, the prophet, he's kind of the mean one because why? Because he doesn't have the heart of the shepherd. Oh, right. Okay. Well, then I don't want anything to do with that.
That's good, man.
Jason's in the middle of writing a book that I think is going to be dialing into this. It's called Leaving and Finding Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically leaving the Jesus that people think God is, the Zeus-like caricature of God, and bringing in that incarnational who Jesus really is. And he absolutely represents the Father. And in your book, you bring this out in the chapter on theology of friendship. You quote Peterson again in saying just that the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. I think we are that incarnational feet, hands, eyes, mouth of Jesus that's moving into the neighborhood, and people are going to find the real Jesus as a result of that. And it's not going to happen through, the four walls of the church. But I also haven't given up on the local church. I think,
amen.
We live in the South, man. Sunday mornings at 10 a.m., your butt's going to be in church somewhere. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but let's embrace the incarnational other 6 days of the week, being Jesus to the world.
Yeah,
that's very good.
Let it be.
Yeah,
let it be, Lord. From Derek's lips to your ears.
Hey, man, tell us where we can find you, and all your social media digits, numbers, all that stuff.
So Twitter and Instagram are both at Mr. Daniel Grothe. So MrDanielGrothe. And then DanielGrothe.com. It's a blog that I rarely write on, but there's a bunch that's collected there. So, and just shoot me an email, dgrothe@newlifechurch.org.
And you'll make them do some homework, of course. And then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll write some papers.
Oh, man.
Hey, Daniel, before we let you go, we got to talk tacos. So I understand you actually ate tacos before this podcast, before joining us today, which is just like total dedication. Way to go, man.
Yeah, bravo.
I had to pay homage. It just felt wrong to eat, peanut butter and jelly or biscuits and gravy or ham sandwich. It's like, if we're going to do this, let's do this.
That's it.
So describe your favorite taco to us, or your favorite taco experience. We want to hear it.
My grandma, who's 90, Grandma Wheezy, her twin sister Lois, who turned 90. Lois would make the best. It's been years since she's made them, but she would put the tortilla. So it was a soft tortilla to start, but she would put it on the skillet and get some oil going on it and harden it up, and it would kind of swell up like this and then shrink back down. And then I don't know how she did it, but she would figure out a way to harden it just to the right amount, just the right texture. And then she would fill it up with some great beef that my grandma Wheezy raised out on their ranch. And then grandma would make amazing guacamole and some really nice salsa, and then sprinkle it with cheese. So my grandma and my great aunt working together in the kitchen. So to me, it didn't even just have to be about the way it tasted, though it was excellent. It was two of the most iconic women in my life working together, showing me their love and feeding a whole tribe of 50 of us. So that to me would be frozen in my mind as taco holy ground.
Love it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, that fits right in line with everything else you've said, man. Going to Grandma's Tacos.
Right.
It's about place. Love it. Well, listen, man, honored to have you on this podcast. I think I think this is going to bless a lot of folks, encourage a lot of folks. And we do recommend, man, checking out your book and finding you on Twitter and connecting with you.
Hey, and Jason, just so you know, it's on the down low, but I'm working on getting Daniel here to speak at River Church. And we're going to have Andy Squires probably come in and be our guest worship leader, because Daniel's a big Andy Squires fan. So I'll let everybody know when that's happening. Keep your eyes open in 2022 for Daniel Grothe and Andy Squires at River Church.
Let it be.
Andy's awesome. I've been on staff with Andy, and he's a cool dude for sure. That'll be a really good time.
I'm a fun guy.
Yeah. Oh, good. All right. Bless you, man.
Derek, I love you, man. I love your whole crew, and I thank God for your mark on my life. So thanks for having me on today.
Oh, man. Love you too, Daniel. Really do. Hey guys, we're so glad that you are joining us for Rethinking God with Tacos. You can find me, Derek Turner, at rivercharlotte.com. That's my church. And I'm on all the social medias as Pastor Derek T, Derek, Pastor Derek T.
Yeah, and he's a Twitter savant. You got to follow him on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter at Jason Clark Is. And you can find all of these podcasts, including season 1, on all of the platforms. You can also go to afamilystory.org, and everything's there. If you sign up for our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that has articles, podcast information, and we also let you know about new books coming out or events that we're connected to. So like, share, retweet, and man, if you could write a review, it actually does something for the rankings. It makes it more available. So,
but a 5-star review, of course.
Yes.
If you can't write a 5-star review or something, just don't even write a review.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like, if you can't say something nice,
don't say anything at all. I like that, and then apply that to this podcast. Definitely.
That's my motto. That's what I do.
I love it. So love you guys. Appreciate you coming on the ride with us. God bless.